Welcome, everyone. I'm Angela Seifer. I'm the Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and we're going to get started. Hitting record now. Welcome. This is the second in our series of net inclusion webinars. We're very excited to have you all with us today. Yes, we are recording this because that's the first question everybody asks. This is a webinar, not a meeting. I know NDIA does a lot of Zoom meetings where we interact with everyone in our community, and we love interacting with our community. This one is a webinar, so we have some amazing panelists. We're going to tell you some awesome information today about digital navigators. We do have a Q&A, so because it's a Zoom webinar instead of a meeting, we ask that your questions go in the Q&A. Please do engage in the chit chat in the chat. We are a community, right? There's lots of folks who have lots of amazing answers for you who may not actually be a panelist because we're that kind of community. Folks want to help each other. NDIA has been around about 7 years. We got started because there wasn't an entity representing digital inclusion efforts on the ground, so that's what we do. We're a unified voice for affordable home broadband, the appropriate devices, digital literacy training, tech support, all the things one needs to participate today. So I'm going to move over to Paulo. Paulo Balboa is the NDIA's research and programs manager. We keep flipping around some titles, so I'm pretty sure that's correct. And he has been leading our digital navigator work. So it's pretty fabulous that he can lead this panel today of some of our community members who are doing this work on the ground that they've really been building from scratch. And that's amazing. And I'm going to turn it over to Paulo.
Great. Thanks, Angela. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being with us on this very exciting panel about digital navigators. We have an all-star panel of experts and knowledge experts across the field who are in their own spheres getting different versions of the digital navigator model off the ground. We have Andrew Au, who is the Director of Operations at Digital Charlotte, Shauna Edson, Digital Inclusion Coordinator at the Salt Lake City Public Library, Krista Vinson, Program Officer at the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and Priyanka Sharma, Project Director with World Education and the co-lead on Digital Us. Before I begin what should be a lively and informative discussion around digital navigators, I thought it might be useful to give some background around how digital navigators came to be, right? Just at least from our perspective in the digital inclusion world, the work of digital navigators has existed for a long time, right? Community members have always needed some sort of technical support and a kind of guiding hand from a knowledgeable and trustworthy member of their community to get them to the resources that they need online. When COVID-19 hit, however, last year, a lot of organizations in the digital inclusion world and elsewhere were scrambling to figure out how to continue their services, how to continue serving their community members when everything had to be remote and had to be socially distant. So NDIA, like we do everything, asked our vast array of experts across the field. I like to describe it as we ask people who are way smarter than us and ask them, how are you doing this work? What's working and what's not working? We're thrilled today to have 4 of these such experts on our panel today who will describe how Digital Navigators is working in their selective spheres. In the digital inclusion world, we like to use this analogy of the 3 legs of the stool: affordable broadband, affordable devices, and that training piece. Digital Navigators is a program that is adapting that 3 legs of the stool to a COVID-19, to a remote learning framework. What we've learned from speaking with our community members and from getting Digital Navigators programs off the ground is that there's an emphasis in the Digital Navigator program on that trust. A community member should be able to reliably trust and call on a digital navigator for any sort of technical support that they may need. These interactions may happen over the course of several days, several weeks. We want there to be a rapport built between a community member and a digital navigator. Everything that NDIA has learned so far, we are adding to our digital navigator model page, which one of my coworkers will put in the chat. The best thing about digital navigators, I think, as we'll hear about today, is that it's a flexible model. It's a replicable and adaptable model that any organization can take, adapt, reuse based on an organization's unique needs or their own mission or the communities that they serve. Different versions of the model have sprung up in the past year, for instance, in a public library, in rural areas, and in urban areas as well. So we'll hear today from our panelists about how that model has taken shape. So I'll start by asking our panelists, can you tell us about the basic structure of your Digital Navigator program? For instance, when you launched, where you're located, and what kind of communities that you serve? We'll start with Andrew.
Thanks, Paulo. So my name is Andrew. I am with Digital Charlotte in Charlotte, North Carolina. Our Digital Navigator model actually launched in January of this year. We have more of a call center based model where we partnered with the city of Charlotte to piggyback on their 311 municipal service. Using this, any community member across Charlotte is able to call 311 and effectively submit a ticket to our Digital Navigators. That ticket will be logged into our service desk software, and then a Digital Navigator will be able to read and respond to each ticket that gets submitted to us.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew. Priyanka, could you talk about, tell us a little about your model?
Thanks, Paulo. It's an honor to be part of this panel with some of my favorite people. As World Education, I support this collective impact coalition called Digital Us, of which NDIA is a part, and we're really happy to have you guys as part of that mix. And we envision the Digital Navigator services embedded in systems and locations. We've been working on the virtual delivery of the Digital Navigator services since last year. So some programs, and because we come from it from working with our partners' perspective, the location is tricky because I think at some programs are in local communities in some states, others are sort of state level systems that do capacity development work. And we're guiding them in implementing this model, and I'm sure I'll have a lot more to add to that overall description later.
Definitely. Thanks, Priyanka. Shauna.
Hi, thank you. So our project at the Salt Lake City Public Library in Salt Lake City, Utah, launched in December of 2020. So we're halfway through our 8-month pilot program for our direct service. The communities we are focusing on, we worked with Bill Callahan and the NDIA to research census data to help us identify households with the lowest connectivity and device ownership in Salt Lake City. And so we identified our focus communities of Glendale, Poplar Grove, and Rose Park. So the libraries, branches in those locations are where we're focused, as well as working with 3 community-based organizations in those areas.
Super, thanks, Shauna. And Krista, could you tell us about the basic structure of LISC's Digital Navigator program?
Absolutely, thank you, Paulo. And I have to give so much credit to the NDIA Digital Navigator community of practice for really informing how rural LISC has onboarded and integrated our Digital Navigator, our digital equity approach. So we launched actually just in the fall of 2020 with 9 community-based organizations in 7 states in rural Appalachia, so communities of about 30,000 folks or less. And in that time, since fall of 2020, these community-based organizations, which might be involved in affordable housing or our community action agencies or involved in workforce development, have been able to work with over 500 clients to support their access to devices that they may own or lend in return, numbering about 700 devices, and have supported about 350 home internet connections, in addition to data plans for devices where it was appropriate for the client. So what I'm pleased to talk about more later is that it is possible to achieve scale for digital inclusion in rural places.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's certainly a unique perspective doing digital inclusion work in a rural area where the digital divide is stark. You can see it every day. So I want to move on and talk about who a digital navigator may be. Several of you, we're all hearing in the working group and from perhaps folks in our respective communities, like what kind of skills does a digital navigator have? What are you and folks in your organization, or Priyanka in your case, the organizations that you work with, right? Like what kind of people are well equipped to become digital navigators? What skills and qualifications are you looking for? Let's start with Andrew again.
So I guess the answer is that the person that we're looking for is always evolving. Right now in our first phase, since we just launched in January, we actually partnered with an organization here in Charlotte that focuses on returning citizens. With that, they were able to be trained up as almost in terms of workforce development on certain skills to become a digital navigator. However, because of Digital Charlotte, we're integrated into the Queen's University of Charlotte university system, that we are also looking for students. We're also meeting with corporate social responsibility groups to discuss if we can have volunteers. The biggest thing is we're building out effectively an internal playbook that no matter what your skill set is, you have sort of a reference point. So that way, you know that if you might not have the answers, whoops. Sorry, can you see me now?
Yes, yep.
Awesome. That way, if you know that if you don't have the answers, you know that you have a playbook that you can rely on to either find the answer or find an organization that could help you further find the answer for that community member.
That's great. So it sounds like the building of like an internal playbook, as you said, or like a resource guide for potential new hires to keep the model going and continuing to scale. Thanks, Andrew. Priyanka, could you talk about the type of folks, organizations that you're working with are looking for, like the kind of backgrounds and skills?
The way that's a great question. And I think the way we are envisioning the digital navigator piece is more not just as the who, because the who is important, but more of a where and how sort of question. So looking at an organization, like where within their existing programming and services can these digital navigator services, this intervention be layered into to add to the scaffolds of services that they're providing to the community they're in. It goes all the way from, one of our pilot programs is a tribal college, and they are in a very rural space. They have found the best fit for them is AmeriCorps volunteers that are already placed in the college, and that way also identifying who exactly are you serving. And so they're serving adults who are completing their GED and trying to get into some training programs. So I think that sort of the who there looks very different from another place that we're working with in DC, where they are invested in getting the alumni of their digital skills program to get their sort of first job, quote unquote, as digital navigators, and guide others through digital skills building while helping them with connectivity and devices, so that they are sort of getting that experience as they move on to other jobs, but then also really building that pipeline within the program for digital navigators. So it's been very interesting that there are commonalities regardless of the context in which programs are operating. One, of course, there needs to be a high level of empathy to really understand where folks are coming from, where their needs lie, and a deeper understanding of the systemic inequities in the system. Because I think it goes way beyond somebody not having the skills or not having access. There's intersectionality with racial equity and other inequities in the system. So through our training materials and resources, we really want to put that front and center as we even look towards training the digital navigator, so they understand this issue in the context of the world we live in.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree. A digital navigator should have an understanding of the framing, like why the problem exists to begin with, and understanding, digital inclusion and the digital divide is another category of community health. Is another way to measure community health. I think is so important for folks to realize. Thanks, Priyanka. Shauna, could you talk about what kind of folks the Salt Lake City Public Library is hiring or adapting in your?
Yeah, so I'm kind of repeat some of what Andrew and Priyanka have already stated, because I think they've outlined it really well. But because our program is smaller and we were really focused on a few specific neighborhoods in Salt Lake City, we were also looking for individuals that live in those communities, to be able to communicate and understand and support those community members in this position. Skills having, it was very important for our digital navigators to be able to speak Spanish, because there's a high percentage of Spanish speaking individuals in our focus communities. We were also looking for people with really great customer service skills and patience, as well as problem solving, being able to kind of step up and figure out how to help support an individual through problem solving. We felt like was really important. And then, like Priyanka also stated, understanding digital equity and systemic inequities in our city and how those have unfolded. And then basic computer skills, not last but least, but we feel like those can be taught, but having some comfortable familiarity with technology was important as well.
I think it's interesting to list computer skills at the end of that list. Like, first and foremost, as Priyanka mentioned, like this idea of empathy, someone coming from the community that they're serving really is sort of like the foundation that a good digital navigator can work upon. Krista, could you talk about the skills that organizations that Rural LISC is working with, what kind of skills and background they're looking for?
Sure, I'd love to key off the last couple of comments. I have learned from the NDIA Digital Navigator Working Group community that there are some emerging models in terms of how we approach the work of digital inclusion, the social work model, the adult education model, and certainly not to suggest that any one of those models is to the exclusion of any other, but I think LISC sort of lands more squarely on that social work model, because our community-based partners that we have created sort of a pass-through grant opportunity for them to focus on the digital inclusion work are experienced professional case managers. So for example, digital navigator programs launched in our financial opportunity centers, and those are folks who coach around financial and employment sort of support areas in the interest of long-term wealth building. And so for financial opportunity centers, the idea of digital literacy sort of integrating into that portfolio of work made a lot of sense. And likewise, for our other community-based partners that were already established partners of LISC, it was a question of how to integrate this portfolio within their program of work. So our training has involved kind of cross-training these case managers around the three-legged stool of digital inclusion and having them be involved in sort of understanding their market. So doing that scan to evaluate what options they might present to a client who has a question about participating with technology, who may come into the organization seeking other kinds of services. And so for those organizations that are new partner relationships for LISC in our Southern US cohort that just launched a month ago, we just asked the same question. What does it mean to include and integrate digital inclusion type programming with your existing portfolio? And folks had great answers and have already kind of been off to the races to really support clients, kind of ask these questions and then be able to provide that follow-on support very, very tactically, that device acquisition or home internet connection or related skills.
That's awesome. Yeah, so what I'm hearing across all four of your answers is that this is a person that comes from the community. They have that trust ingrained either by speaking the language of their community members or coming from like a soft touch social work kind of background. Digital Navigators is a program that does involve technology and technology skills, but as Shauna mentioned, right, like that comes a little bit after after the rest of like the empathetic piece that Priyanka mentioned, you can teach those computer skills. You can't, the other stuff is harder to come by. So I'd like to move on to ask some more individualized questions here. Priyanka, you said before that digital navigators are at the core of digital equity ecosystems, and this phrase that you use that I love, digital resilience. What's your vision for embedding digital navigators into existing roles and programming?
That's a great question and one of my favorite questions. I'm going to put a plug in for our report that sort of introduces the notion of digital resilience, and I'll put that in the chat as well as to what we mean when we say digital resilience. What we are really interested in figuring out, just as I mentioned before, in terms of a systems thinking approach that is required of digital navigators to be effective and for programs to integrate those services, we want to look towards the same sort of approach when we are thinking about embedding these digital navigator services. I mean, I think, as you mentioned, Paulo, it has been more than decades in making. The various reasons why we're sort of in the space we're in and the sort of stage of digital divide we're in right now. And so we're envisioning the solutions, one of the solutions being these digital navigator services, as something that's short to medium term in the least, in terms of getting them set up, getting them off the ground, getting them to be sustainable, to really make a dent into the problem. And being the solution to digital inclusion. And I feel like the pandemic has really created an urgency around this issue, and programs have pivoted very quickly into being sort of the bridge to connect people who have been disconnected, even more so, as we know millions go to libraries regularly, used to go to the libraries to get that sort of device access and internet access to get some of the work done. K-12 systems sort of also relied on their community organizations to make sure the kids get their homework done. I mean, we know all of those problems, and I feel like the solutions we have right now are sort of more, I don't want to use Band-Aid, but it's more for the time of that we're in right now. As we, slowly look into the fall and beyond, we want these services to continue and sort of evolve, to continue to be the bridge as to in the new ways we're going to have either in-person training, or as there's emergency broadband benefit is like one of the benefits that is being offered, and we hope that with all the advocacy of organizations like NDIA and fellow partners, there's going to be more and more support at the federal and the state level to support digital navigator services. And how do we provide sort of that backbone of making sure that those services are sustainable over a short to medium period of time. And in terms of like really getting down to the ground as to what it looks like, we feel that the digital navigator services need to be layered and embedded into even more than one role. So looking at a program design and seeing where a digital navigator role can be embedded into the existing services is sort of the direction we want to have programs look into, or even thinking about how digital navigator services can be shared across programming, across organization, in a region, or in a local space.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think, fingers crossed as vaccinations start to roll out across the US and we can sort of begin to imagine a future that is no longer socially distant. I think that's so important, Priyanka, to begin to think about what digital navigators looks like as a sustainable solution, right? Like we've learned so much and we've seen that this is such a helpful and useful program to communities across the US. How do we keep the groundswell going on this work? Which I will maybe revisit towards the end of this panel. That's sort of like the big overarching question, right? But for now, I'll move on to you, Krista. So Digital Navigators, right, it's a program, it's designed to serve these historically underserved community members. Everything that we do in the digital inclusion world is for that. Talk to us about how Rural LISC's Digital Navigator program addresses the unique needs in rural communities.
Sure, and I look back at some of the notes that our program partners offered as they worked through this program, and I want to share a few of those anecdotes. But at the beginning of the program, it was really kind of a question of there being an equivalence between the three legs of the stool, right? The home internet connection, the devices, and the skills. In rural places, the obvious question is there access to a reliable broadband internet connection sufficient to the present demands of remote learning or remote work, et cetera. And so part of the Digital Navigator program was really asking the digital navigators to do that market scan, figure out kind of who the providers are and what their offers are as it relates to internet availability. And then likewise with devices to collect the same information, whether they were able to tap into a pipeline from a local mom and pop retailer or some of the national refurbishers or regional refurbishers that distribute regionally. And so most of the digital navigators sort of started the work thinking that they would focus on both of those things, but it came to sort of be obvious that due to the lack of reliable broadband service in this question, the follow-on question of affordability, our digital navigators ended up focusing primarily on device distribution and related skilling. But some of the organizations have become so concerned about this lack of available broadband that they're seeing a way to expand their digital equity program work going forward to really address that access gap in rural places and inserting themselves as stakeholders in that broadband planning process, which I think is really important. I mean, sort of putting a flag in the ground to say digital equity matters in this community and let's bring all the stakeholders together. And it may be that one stakeholder is focused on a different piece of this pie than another, but together, what can we accomplish collaboratively? So I just wanted to give voice to that. And I also wanted to share how impressed I have been that our partners have been able to approach service providers and negotiate low offers if they weren't available, or sort of set up a tablet distribution plan for seniors that they're working with, and those tablets were comped by the provider, and then maybe the organization, the Digital Navigator host organization, was paying for the data plan for those clients. So I mean, the idea of empowering a digital navigator to stretch and flex this idea of digital equity to really accommodate what the needs are in the community is an exciting one, and one we've certainly seen in the LISC community, and I no doubt is how folks across the NDIA community are carrying forward this work.
That's awesome. So Andrew, I'd like to move on to give you some time to talk about Digital Charlotte. You have a unique call center workflow that you teased out a few moments ago in your intro. How did you and the Digital Charlotte team decide on this service model, and how's it going so far? What's that been like?
Yeah, so it's been going great. But the call center model was kind of birthed only out of necessity because of our work with the city of Charlotte. City of Charlotte really needed this digital navigator model to almost happen. Digital Charlotte before this was mainly focused on workshops, in-person workshops. So as soon as we were put in this situation with the pandemic, the city of Charlotte was looking to us to figure out how we could provide resources, how they could provide resources to the community when knowing that these in-person classes were unavailable. As the digital navigator model from the NDIA started to roll out, we started to realize that there's a possibility there, but we also knew that because we wanted to reach a wider scope, we couldn't necessarily do, an organization one-to-one type model. And that's how we came down to deciding the call center model, a way where any community member across the city would be able to call in, submit a ticket, and then have a response from a digital navigator to walk them through the steps to a solution or the solution itself.
Great. And just to follow up on that, is the call center is through the City of Charlotte's municipal line, right? That's
correct. Yeah. So we were able, luckily, to piggyback off of that so that anyone within the Charlotte area is able to just call 311, talk to a call center rep, explain through the situation that's happening. And then the call center rep would go to the web form that we've created, ask the necessary questions, submit a ticket, and then it goes into our service desk software, in which a navigator is on the other side receiving these tickets and then doing any sort of due diligence research if necessary, and then reaching back out to the community member to help them address whatever help they need.
That's awesome. Thanks for the clarification, Andrew. Shauna, at the Salt Lake City Public Library, you and the program team were very intentional about the community-based organizations that you chose to partner with. Could you tell us about your decision-making process and how you chose those partner organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, our project is a little bit smaller, focused pilot project. So similar to the digital navigators we wanted community-based organizations that were rooted in our focus communities, that were a trusted organization and actively engaged with folks. We also were looking for organizations that had a desire for sustaining this type of work moving forward after our pilot program, so we could create an opportunity for some of their staff to have some professional development in digital equity work and digital inclusion work. We also were looking for organizations that were actively engaged with folks that might not be engaged with the library, our library branches in those areas. So one of our community-based organizations is Catholic Community Services, and they're focused on the onboarding process for new refugees entering our country. Another is University Neighborhood Partners, and our Digital Navigator project there is focused on working with families in the Salt Lake City School District. And our third community-based organization is Swazo Business Center, and they're supporting small business owners at this time. So we were kind of hoping for a wide variety of different organizations that could help us reach different individuals.
Super intentional, and again, it seems to undergird that idea of working with partners who are ingrained in a community to sort of engender and build that trust from the ground up. So I wanted to talk about the data piece of digital navigators. This is a question that comes up every now and then that I think about certainly a lot. But I wanted to ask the data question in the framework of the three legs of the stool: broadband, devices, digital literacy training. Are you finding that the needs, so now that we're in our digital navigators programs, they're off the ground. Now that you've been able to get these programs off the ground, figure out what's working, what doesn't working, are you finding that the needs of community members that your digital navigators programs are serving are skewing towards specific legs of this stool? Just as an additional framing, for instance, right, we think about connectivity in rural areas, for instance. I just thought that would be, just wanted to ask, Andrew, what have you found that the questions are skewing towards a specific leg of the stool?
Yeah, I would say that most of our questions revolve around internet access. We set up our form to be able to do a drop-down box of just selecting the area, essentially selecting the leg of stool that you want to talk about. That gives us the ability to know going into a call back of the community member what kind of help we're providing. With that type of dropdown, we're able to take that data accumulated, make essentially a chart of knowing which frequency of type of help that we need to provide. And usually, I would say that 1 out of every 3 tickets we've received, or sorry, of course, I would say that a majority of our tickets are broadband internet access related.
So what's the follow through with that? If someone requests that they need help with broadband or internet access, is the digital navigator then directing that community member towards specific offers? Do they walk them through the form? What do those interactions look like, Andrew?
So to plug another national organization, we actually use Everyone On's offer tool on their website. So it really is one of those situations where we know that we're not inventing anything new. We know the resources are already out there. The community member might not. So when a community member requests, hey, I'm looking for affordable broadband internet access, our navigators would know, okay, well, they're going to go to the to the Everyone On offers tool, and then ask them the questions to see if they pre-qualify. And if they do pre-qualify, then we're able to then determine which internet provider is the best for them in terms of what the internet offer provides and what the community member's situation is. And then depending on it, whether it is through email or over the phone, we help them get connected to whoever they need to be connected to, whether it's applying online to AT&T Access or connecting them to another local internet service provider, a representative, to get them signed up.
That's awesome. So it's really just depending on what the community member needs. Like the digital navigator will take them as far as they need to go.
Yeah, it's really just someone to guide them the way, a navigator, right? We're not trying to do everything. We know that there's a bunch of organizations out there that are doing great work. We're just helping them navigate and wayfind to those organizations.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Priyanka, you at Digital Us have more of a national scope of the types of issues that are coming up, given that you're working with so many different types of programs. Could you talk about the legs of the stool that the programs are focused on?
Yeah, and I think you started this panel brilliantly with sort of talking about that the idea of digital navigator has existed in different ways under different names over, in libraries, especially over the years. What we're finding is that, and this particular sort of the virtual delivery of the digital navigator services is a product of the times we're in since the last year. And that's kind of when all of us got started in this particular space as we flesh out the models and the framework. And so we think that overall, in all the programs and states that are piloting these services, there's definitely everybody's leaning towards the connectivity and the devices piece, which I don't think it's a measure of where the needs lie. It's just where we are, like where a lot of times, especially when it comes to digital skills, people really don't know what they don't know. And what are the opportunities that are available, and what can like digital skills training really do to their potential in terms of job opportunities, et cetera. So I think similar to Andrew, what we're finding is this more questions about, hey, where can I get reliable connectivity? I heard you have some vouchers, or is there a device I can, you have a lending program that I heard about on the radio, like, how can I get access? So I think that's kind of what we're seeing. What I think is very interesting is what we're just beginning to see is since January, like some of the programs we work with, also realizing that they sometimes get questions about people that they have given devices to who are having trouble just with the device sometimes, and sometimes it's something very sort of basic. Realizing that there's that human connection that's missing, like the way you want to associate yourself with a digital navigator, like that thread isn't there. So the programs that have instituted this like really innovative way of stretching out the hand delivery of hotspots or laptops into an in-person orientation of even 15 minutes, sometimes in a parking lot set up on a table, other times in a safe, masked environment inside their program. They are really seeing those same learners then calling back and saying, hey, you helped me open my, open an email account, but I also had this other question, wondering if you can help me. So I think building that rapport as being sort of like the go-to place for digital skills questions. I mean, I think we're sort of seeing that shift, and that's going to be very interesting to see how that really deepens the connection between community members and organizations that are offering the digital navigator services as it becomes safer to do so in the way we all love to operate most of the time, which is in person.
I love that phrase that you use, Priyanka, like, you know, not derisively, but it's true, like a learner doesn't know what they don't know, right? Maybe they don't have the vocabulary or the language to describe their issue, but traditionally a place like a public library, for instance, is the place where they can go and have that human connection. They can, you know, feel comfortable admitting that, look, I'm here, I walked through the doors today because I need help. So could you help me out? Which I think is a good transition to move over to Shauna to talk about the issues and the needs of community members at the Salt Lake City Public Library that you're seeing so far.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Salt Lake City is a highly connected city comparatively around the country. So we were interested to see, what people would reach out for. We've only had around 5% of our participants. We have about 450 participants thus far. Only about 5% have reached out for home connectivity. So we thought that number would be a little bit higher. We were really surprised with that. Around 75% of folks reaching out to us needed a computer or a device of some sort. And then at an initial contact or the first interaction, about 10% of people were calling specifically for digital skills support. But what we're finding, and the data is still very raw, is that kind of like what Priyanka was talking about with an ongoing relationship. Oh, I got the computer now. I know this person helped me. Now I need to know how to do X, Y, or Z. And it's kind of developing an ongoing relationship. So our digital navigators are finding that they're working with the same individual. Sometimes they set up weekly appointments to just touch base. They always follow up. We have time built in for them to follow up and kind of see what their next needs are, because the type of support that they need with digital skills kind of develops as they develop their usage of technology too. So we'll see what we find at the end of the pilot.
That's awesome. Thanks, Shauna. And Krista, could you talk about the unique needs of related to the three legs of the stool of folks in rural areas?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to underscore some points I made previously, that our program partners really understand the long game of an affordable wired home internet connection, universally available, across the United States, and devices that are appropriate to the life task, with, an emphasis on computers or Chromebooks. But we've noticed that our partners were giving really helpful feedback to LISC about wanting to most efficiently serve their core client population. So some examples might be that a cell phone and an associated data plan made sense for those folks that were in transitional housing situations, or hotspot programs were just going to get the job done. And so where our digital navigators ended up being ultimately very, very creative is negotiating that kind of the price on that bulk hotspot distribution, or what have you. But I just want to read a quote from one of our partners who said, a community action agency in Southwest Pennsylvania, "We will continue to advocate for expanding and strengthening rural broadband for our residents." So a community action agency that wasn't doing digital inclusion 8 months ago, but realized that it was an appropriate type of program to integrate into their existing portfolio, especially as a result of COVID, has done that, and then is sort of has a window on the next way that they could contribute in their community, which is really to become an advocate for their better broadband options, and kind of getting involved in that work. So I wanted to just emphasize our greatest learning coming off of our data is that three-legged stool is is not rigidly defined. Digital navigators know their clients, and let's trust them to find the right solution, and then empower them to be involved in kind of putting a flag in the ground in their community for digital equity, and what else can we do to get to that ideal, that universally available and affordable and appropriate participation with technology.
That's super. Priyanka, Shauna was speaking a little bit to your point about connections with community members. Did you want to expand upon that?
Yeah, I think what Shauna said really drives with what we're listening from our programs and states as well. And one of the things that really jumped out is what Shauna, you mentioned about having sort of like these weekly check-ins just to make sure that relationship thread continues, and also people feel connected and supported to their local organization that's offering these services. What we found was that the need became such is now some programs are beginning to have these like monthly at this point, sort of like drop-ins, like virtual drop-ins, where there's like a 1 or 2 hour slot where there's a Zoom link that's shared with everybody who is sort of called in, or community members who can just connect in, since they have all mostly been oriented to Zoom, to ask questions and actually even learn from each other. So there's like a lot of interesting synergy happening between, Krista coming in with a question about her device, and me being another member of the community saying, hey, Krista, like I can help you with that. I had the same problem and Paulo helped me out. So let me just, help you out there. So I think we're kind of seeing other sort of connections being built in, and we foresee that's something that's really empowering from both ends, from a program in terms of if its impact, and for clients and learners in the community to kind of feel like they have that support and can support others as well.
So I wanted to get to one of the big elephants in the room here, right? It's funding, money. How are you getting these programs off the ground? How do you even get started? In the chat, I noticed a question specifically about funding, and then another question that went even further about, from funders, are you getting pressure about making sure that your digital navigators have a certification over what other people might describe as sort of like the soft touch empathy piece, which I think we all agree is quite important, but hard to convince. So let's just talk about money for a second. Let's start with Andrew. How is Digital Charlotte gathering resources?
So we were actually very lucky to have a great relationship with the City of Charlotte. So, and I'm putting in the chat as well, the City of Charlotte was awarded some CARES Act money. And in that, they actually created a multi-level, I guess, pronged approach to use that to close the digital divide in Charlotte. One of them is a digital navigator program that we are working on with them. Another one is providing internet access, no-cost internet access to certain communities in Charlotte. So the funding is pretty much all coming from the city. They are the ones that gave us essentially the seed money, which we were able to set up the infrastructure. With the infrastructure, we were able to create an asset map to know what kind of organizations are around as a resource. We were able to set up the software. We actually use HubSpot. I saw there was a question somewhere in the Q&A, but we use HubSpot as our software to handle all the tickets, as well as to do everything else we need to get done. And then just kind of set up everything else we need to do, including, I guess, the marketing of the program as well, so that the City of Charlotte, all the community members are able to be aware of the 311 phone line, and that they can call in to get assistance from the digital navigator.
Super. Priyanka, could you talk about how funding has been working for the various programs?
So right now, our project is generously funded through Walmart, a Walmart grant, and the organization I work for, World Education, as well as some funding from the Digital Us Coalition. But moving forward, and also, I want to say a significant percentage of the programs that are part of our pilot in our community are actually not directly funded through us. And our funding for them has been limited, with the idea that we wanted to build sustainability from the very start. So the way we sort of even start planning, helping them plan out their digital navigator services is this internal asset mapping of what are the components within their program that can be restructured in a very sort of small sort of way to embed the digital navigator services with an eye towards sustainability and sort of like independence from targeted funding. Of course, all of these programs are funded by a lot of other means, but that I think has been interesting to see how these services have been embedded. Like we see a lot of career and transition specialists within the context of adult education programs and community colleges, realizing that they're already doing a significant amount of work that the navigators would do, but then there's definitely components that they were not, and how to sort of work in those pieces. In other community members, like sometimes social workers, they were actually responding to a lot of requests around issues with not technology per se, but things that would require digital skill building from the perspective of clients. And, so them taking on this additional role of being that bridge in providing connectivity, and especially some in one particular state, we're working with them to kind of design this system where the social workers are also the ones giving equipment to their clients, and what kind of training needs to be embedded. So I think it is about sort of embedding for sustainability, but then also figuring out what's out there, especially as Andrew mentioned with CARES Act money, and there's continued support for now, and how you should try to leverage that on the local level to support this, especially when it comes to getting something off the ground. And over time, I think sustainability does build. Lastly, I'm just going to say that it has been really good to have funding, Paulo, your work, NDIA's work, our work, and other organizations that are doing. Andrew, you're laying the groundwork for like transformation of a community, of a city. Because it does take a lot of money. I don't want to not emphasize the amount of resources it really takes to build the resources to get things off the ground, the implementation guides, the supports, the working groups, the buy-in from other community members. So, but still, having said that, we do try to do things with sustainability at its heart. But thanks all the funders. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, funders. I just want to keep an eye on the time. I'm gonna ask Sean and Chris the same question, but just keeping an eye on the time for folks that may have to jump off at the top of the hour. We're now going to transition into more direct Q&A that you have all have been asking throughout the course of today's webinar. This will still be recorded. The Q&A portion will still be recorded. So if you have to jump off, this recording will be made available and you'll be able to catch up. So just a note for that. So back to our programming. Shauna, could you talk about funding for the Salt Lake City project?
Yeah, our funding for our Digital Navigator pilot project is a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences. We're using the funding to really create our pilot program and our model, as well as gather the data and information to share out why this work is important, the impact that it had over this time, and our lessons learned. So we were able to redesignate some library staff time to only work on this and have it be their primary job, instead of trying to do multiple things, and this might be added to their job description. Moving forward, we also received additional funding for hotspots and Wi-Fi enabled tablets from Google Fiber. So we've been reaching out to other individual organizations to help fund some of our device distribution. And moving forward, our community-based organizations are looking to grants that are available through our city, as well as working with Salt Lake City to help them implement a digital navigator through their computer labs as well. So we'll see what unfolds.
Super. Thanks, Shauna. And Krista, can you talk about the funding model that Rural Lisk is using?
Yes, well, Like Priyanka, Rural Lisk has benefited greatly from the generosity of private philanthropy to stand up this program of work. And I'll emphasize that as much as the nature of the work between the coach and the client is one about sustainable relationship building, trusted relationships, and embedding this program in the organization for sustainability. Rural Lisk's overall approach is quite transactional. The idea of supporting our partners with a turnkey model and encouraging them to track their program results so that they can turn right around and appeal to local community-based funders for follow-on support to be able to carry this program of work forward. And so what Lisk is trying to do is to ease that implementation cost burden for organizations and help them hit the ground running to then go and continue to resource this program from local funders.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to move into the Q&A. I will admit that I just now opened the Q&A and I was like, oh my God, there's so many here. So a lot to get through, but I think that this is a reflection of how amazing this you guys are and the awesome work that you're all doing out in the field. So I think a nice little transition, this was not asked, which I think sort of relates to the marketing external communications piece. How do you tell people about digital navigators? Specifically, how do you tell people who aren't connected? What marketing strategies are you using and what's working, what's not working? Who wants to take this one?
I'll hop in on this one. So we had what we thought was a pretty fabulous marketing plan at the beginning of our pilot. We came up with yard sign campaigns, a door hanger campaign, a chalk art campaign, all these things that are really we could do all around our neighborhoods in Salt Lake City. We were super surprised that word of mouth was by far the most effective marketing. Our community is supportive of each other, and they were telling each other about the program on public transportation, conversations at food banks, social service visits, dialysis. Some people talked about it, getting dialysis. So really, there are lots of things that we have done with kind of those hard copy materials, but really getting the word out to all sorts of different organizations in the community and letting community members will spread the word as well.
I can follow up with that. That hard copy is our best route as well. We do have a social media campaign as well, where we are promoting the Digital Navigator program. That is more just for awareness for anyone else that might be online, but our biggest benefit that we've noticed, because we actually have a referral slot in our form to find out where people are hearing about the Navigator program, and it's usually from door hanger counts and flyers. We have flyers, door hangers, yard signs, and stickers that we kind of pass out and distribute, especially in those neighborhoods in the Access Charlotte program from the city of Charlotte. We have gone to those neighborhoods and kind of, with Complex's permission, kind of spread out all the offline paper marketing materials we can, and that's how we're getting the most feedback from that.
My answer seems to be analog methods work. So another question that
I just want to chime in with the various pilots that are happening. I feel like that's sort of the common theme, is to reaching the clients or learners definitely has been more analog, and some programs are using radio ads in their local radios, but there's a critical function that social media has served, which is to bring in community partners. It's like, hey, you guys are doing this. I had no idea, but I saw it on Twitter, and let's see how we can work together. So I think it's been very interesting to kind of seeing that layered outreach impact. So that is definitely a great one in terms of social media and local meetings to spread the word about the project itself, to get buy-in from community organizations.
Super. Another question from the chat from Carissa. She asks, how do you feel about the concept of how do you feel the concept of digital navigators has been received from people and organizations outside of the digital inclusion space? Priyanka and Andrew, I'm thinking of you two, like, right? Priyanka working with Walmart, Andrew working with a city entity, right? People who aren't really ingrained here. How has that been in your experience, Priyanka?
Not from a funder's perspective, and I think since our work is mostly around adult education and workforce development organizations and systems, there's definitely a strong buy-in in terms of digital skills building now, especially during the pandemic when they're realizing that lots of learners are not able to connect to training and classes. So there's that sort of buy-in into the need for digital skills building. What I think continues to be, I hate to say a struggle, but there's this whole idea of a reticence towards, I don't know anything about devices or connectivity, so I don't think it's my place as a workforce development adult education organization to help with that. Isn't there somebody else in the community that's doing that I can partner with? So I think there's, and I totally understand that sort of point of view, but that's kind of where it's sitting right now, is realizing that some aspects of it are more in line with an organization's mission than others when it comes to digital inclusion. Like one of the legs of the stool is very naturally fits in to their mission. So working with them to kind of seeing how they're actually intricately related, and also figuring out what that local ecosystem could look like, so that it feels like it's everybody's responsibility to make sure the community members feel supported.
Anyone else, experiences working with folks outside of the digital inclusion sphere, what that's been like? Krista, how has it been working with people who are completely new to the digital inclusion world?
Well, it's been delightful to learn when we put out the solicitation for the Southern cohort of digital navigators, how large the interest was from organizations, and a real sense of receptiveness to the proposal that existing staff could be cross-trained to provide these supports. I do think that one thing that sort of eases the glide path for organizations new to this work in the Role-less program is the pass-through grant that subsidizes the staff time for that cross-training, and then the client outreach, and then also subsidize the client participation with technology, so that coaches are able to problem solve for folks, immediately. And then with these organizations, they have the existing client flow. It's just a question of introducing the digital realm related topics in their normal intake. So I think that that the sub grant that LISC made did support participation, but I would just maybe at this point emphasize how great it was to see our Digital Navigator program partners reaching out into the community and identifying other resource partners and being able to refer back and forth. For example, a library in South Carolina had suspended their training as a result of COVID, and our Digital Navigator partner boosted the Wi-Fi at their facility and was able to do a socially distanced training course, helping the library, reintroduce that program sooner than expected. So, just sort of this idea of collaborating to extend the reach of resources is what I want to leave folks with.
Really well said. I see Andrew in the chat has mentioned working with hospital and healthcare systems locally in Charlotte. And I wanted to follow that up with a few more questions for you, Andrew, that are directed for you in the Q&A. Gabriella asks about the average response time for your DN service, and furthermore, is it meeting the client's needs?
Yeah, so it's our internal service level agreement SLA to try to respond to a ticket within at least or at most 48 hours from the submission. That is our, I guess, general timeline, because we don't have navigators necessarily on the clock during weekends. So we can't say like you'll have someone respond back in 24 hours when someone submits something over the weekend. So the 48 hours is kind of our buffer time. However, usually as essentially the manager of our tickets, as soon as the ticket comes in, I'm pretty quick to respond of assigning it and delegating it to a navigator. And then from there, it's depending on when and timing of the navigator or of the day itself, a navigator should be able to respond within the day, hopefully, more than likely within the day to to a community member. Now, there is certain complexities to that. Certain net community members will note when they are available, so they might submit a ticket when they're available, but when a navigator receives the ticket, they might not be available anymore, in which case we wait until the appropriate time to reach back out to them. Additionally, when a navigator reaches out, they might be reaching out and receive no answer because it's an unknown number, so it's a voicemail. So then we leave a voicemail, and we're kind of sitting in a stage where we're waiting for the community member to call us back. But generally, our SLA is around 48 hours to give us some buffer time when it comes to the weekend.
Thanks for taking that. And one more question for you, Andrew, coming from the folks joining us from the Providence Library, asking specifically about 311 support. Is that available in multiple languages?
So I believe at the moment 311 in Charlotte is English only. Unfortunately, we are working right now with the Latin American Coalition, a local Spanish-speaking organization here in Charlotte, to figure out what our next steps are to be able to provide at least a Spanish offering in terms of submitting a ticket or reaching out to a Spanish-speaking navigator. We're also in the process of recruiting for one of those as well. So we don't have multiple languages, but it is one of the first things we identified as soon as we launched. We kind of, to be honest, got called out by one of our colleagues for not having multiple languages, right? And that really put the pressure on us, and kind of put us in a spot where we're like, okay, we need to figure out what our next steps are to be more readily available to folks who aren't just English speakers.
Nothing like being kept honest on the job. It's a good thing, right? That's how we learn. So James McLean asked a question about how your models are being influenced by COVID-19, if at all. So for instance, are there local, state / national needs for vaccinations being prioritized? Specifically, maybe like getting someone registered for a vaccine appointment. Are you seeing that pop up in your digital navigator programs? Anyone?
At least we haven't seen that, and I feel like it's again like the mission aspect. It's like we do know that some programs, especially the one in Boston, is closely working with like there's a Massachusetts volunteer organization that helps learners, helps community members get vaccine appointments. So we're seeing those local connections being developed, but I don't think it hasn't translated into the Digital Navigator program in itself. More at a programmatic level.
Great. So there was another question that popped up pretty recently, asking all the panelists specifically about if you're giving devices away. And Shauna, you had mentioned in the Salt Lake City program that was the case. So an anonymous attendee asked, what is that process like? Could you walk us through that process?
Yeah, so we do have limited funds to give away some devices, Chromebooks, Wi-Fi enabled tablets, and hotspots. So our digital navigators, the process is somebody calls into our call number or comes in via foot traffic and works with a digital navigator. We really wanted to emphasize that we're not a device distribution program, that we wanted folks to recognize that they can come back to us for ongoing support with their devices and they know how to use them. So when they work with a digital navigator to get a device, they fill out an intake form as well as a digital skills assessment. And then they pick it up, and the actual distribution looks different based on the organization and what level of open we are and have been over the past year. Some folks pick it up in person. One of our organizations is allowing people to come into their offices wearing masks and socially distance. Others are more picking it up through a holds to go, so kind of meeting somebody outside at a table, walking them through how to set it up, and they go from there. So it looks a little different. We're trying to be iterative based on the numbers of COVID cases in our city.
And I think most programs we work with do have a lending program. That's more and that's a function of their funding. We do have one program that's part of our work, Literacy Minnesota. They independently from this got funding, some CARES Act funding to do device distribution. They have like this fascinating report on like a return on investment that was supported to see the impact on a community when you actually distribute devices with some digital navigator services and connectivity. And I'll post that in the chat, the link to that brief.
And I'll add that Rural List Partners have been equally iterative, and a question we ask at the very beginning of the program is this, would you like to establish an earn or return program? We've provided the best of available resources from the NDIA community in terms of what agreement language might look like. It can be the back of a napkin. It can be something more formal. The case manager decides what makes sense in terms of the relationship with the client, with the emphasis being that device distribution is part of a long-term relationship, and that the client you should plan to reconnect with the digital navigator for additional support as they begin to use that device.
So there are two questions in the chat, one from Rebecca, and another one from Sean that appear to be closely related. To me, they ask about instilling community members' trust in using the internet. So specifically, Rebecca asked about the best ways of helping folks new to devices and the internet understand cybersecurity, data privacy, in the age of artificial intelligence. Sean asked a similar question about getting a community member to trust these systems that they're using. Any thoughts on how to talk with community members about understanding privacy and security online? It's a bigger one.
Go ahead, Ed.
Sorry. Thank you. To go back to a previous note, like we went analog with it. So in addition to handing out flyers and door hangers saying like, hey, call 311 if you need digital navigator, we also handed out how to be safe on the internet. We just handed pieces of paper with all those tips, right? We sourced it to make sure that they know it's coming from someone reputable, but we just handed out flyers that said, if you're using public Wi-Fi, this is what you should be doing. If you see this as what you should be aware of. It's much tougher to do it kind of on the phone. So we realized that if someone had something they could read and keep and hang up on their fridge or something, that it might resonate further than just like a phone call. But we haven't, luckily, I guess, or we're still early into it, but we haven't gotten too many concerns about the internet so far in our tickets.
So I just want to respond to it from like three different perspectives. So the first is we saw a need for the digital navigators themselves to have a better ability to understand the issues of privacy and especially security. So setting something as basic as don't ask anybody for their passwords. There's that training component that we noticed was critical. So we added that into the digital navigator training. And in addition to that, one of the ways in which we're beginning to do that more is when that device sort of lending happens and there's like a brief onboarding time, is that we cover like 5 things that are critical. Like, 1, call us if there's any questions. If you have a device question, call this IT support. If you need help articulating what the problem is, call us and we'll help you. And then it is about really the basics of set your password, remember it, don't share it with anyone. Like, just making sure that because it is so critical, is that happens at that handoff initially. But that is definitely a very tricky one, and something that does take time to sink in for everyone.
I have a few more questions that appear to be a bit more bigger picture. I'll start with James McLean's question, asking how might the 100 billion for broadband in the current infrastructure bill change the digital landscape for your region? In other words, think big, right? Like, what could this money do for you and the programs that you support? Let's start, Krista. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's tremendous that there is now so much funding available for broadband infrastructure, and it just makes those of us in the digital inclusion and digital equity advocacy space all the more essential, to the equation. This idea of the continuum of access and affordability and adoption is one that we think a lot about at LISC. And as communities begin to plan for broadband infrastructure, an essential ingredient at the front of that planning process should be planning for digital equity. And what does the digital inclusion solution look like, and who are the stakeholders that will be part of carrying that work forward as broadband becomes available, or there are more providers in that market as a result of this infrastructure funding being available.
I'm going to agree with you, Krista. And like I said, Salt Lake City has a pretty high connectivity rate, but there's a lot of rural areas in Utah, and the Utah Broadband Advisory Council is really focused on digital equity as they're looking at these, using these funds moving forward. So it's exciting to see what might be possible.
And another take on it has been to use this sort of investment and buy-in into the problem as a way to leverage more funding to go into the digital skill building, like having more resources for programs and systems to help support and put up those digital skills training in communities, so that broadband really uplifts the community.
Yeah, I mean, with us having a call center model, we at Digital Charlotte are tracking everything really tightly because we're looking for those ways, the ISPs that are opting in, and then also kind of the how to sign up for like the EBB, right? For example, because of the internal playbook that we have, and because our navigators are trained to refer to a playbook to go over these steps. For Digital Charlotte, we're discussing what is the best avenue. If someone were to be able to call and say, hey, we want to sign up for affordable internet access through EBB, if we have a playbook that lined out the steps, could the navigator be that person who is filling out the form over the phone with the community member, because the community member doesn't have the access to everything they need to sign up for their emergency broadband benefit? So there's a lot of discussion on our end of figuring out what best use case can we be to the city of Charlotte. And then in terms of Paulo, you saying dreaming big, when we were creating this framework and the infrastructure for the call center, I kind of had this pipe dream of like, wouldn't it be great if this was scalable to be a call center for all of North Carolina, right? Like, if anyone in all of North Carolina could just call this one number, so it probably wouldn't be 311 anymore, but like this one universal number that if someone was in Raleigh that needed help, and we had our partners in Raleigh in this playbook, right, then we could, as we receive a ticket in, then reassign it to a Raleigh navigator, or that navigator can help as far as they can before then they pass it along and make a soft introduction to a Raleigh organization that can help that community member. So, you know, as this grows bigger and as there's more of a dream big feeling to everything, that, you know, that's how this call center model has been kind of created, that we could scale to be even further and further reaching than just the city of Charlotte.
So we have another question from Tanya asking the panelists, and I think I'm going to send this to you, Andrew. Do you or have you worked with local universities / colleges, in particular with faculty and students, as a part of your work in the digital divide? Andrew, I wanted to send that to you, given your relationship with Queens.
Yeah, so Digital Charlotte, without going too deep into it, is a project out of the Knight School of Communication at Queens University of Charlotte. That's without the university itself, we wouldn't exist as Digital Charlotte. So with that, we have a lot of close relationships, and we always keep in mind of how we can integrate both student, faculty, and staff at the university level in our work. Additionally, we aren't siloed in that. We work with people with Central Piedmont Community College, CPCC here in Charlotte. We also work with the University of North Carolina, Charlotte as well. We have a lot of partnerships because we realize that universities and colleges play a big part. Not only is the institution itself a great resource, but also the fact that there are college students around, there are faculty, there are staff that are looking to be involved, you know, and topics such as digital divide that has really been accelerated and exposed during this pandemic is becoming more and more in the forefront of people's thinking, of realizing, oh, this was tough. You know, I talk to any student who has been like, yeah, I had to spend this past year learning online in my dorm, even though I'm on campus. Like, there's like a whole discussion topic now we can have with them, whereas before, I guess pre-pandemic, you know, the concept might have been a little bit tougher to understand for, you know, people within those institutions.
That's super. Thanks, Andrew. So another question, kind of bouncing off of that comes to us from the Q&A is this appears to be generally, what types of organizations predominantly provide digital navigators or community members? So where are digital navigators coming from? Who wants to take this one?
I can talk about the whole 1 hour answer, but try to condense it into 30 seconds. It's any and all organizations and systems. Evidence is that, like, even just within our sort of family of pilot programs, they are state departments to adult education systems in states, library systems in states to a local library in a rural area. But then also the work that we're just beginning as Digital Us is bringing in the employers to this fold, in convincing them to kind of see how they have a critical role to play in bridging the digital divide. Because we all know how opportunities are connected to people's ability to being online and having the right digital skills. So that's the part of the work that I'm very excited about as we move forward and sort of beyond this phase of the pandemic, to kind of seeing how we can get new buy-in from stakeholders that are critical players in our communities.
Priyanka said that perfectly. So there's almost nothing to reiterate there, except to say how delightful it's been for Ruralist to find out that our community-based partners want to insert themselves into this larger program of work. And I think when an organization like NDIA can advance the idea that digital inclusion is everybody's business, I think we'll start to see the type of transformational change that we all want for our communities when we are able to marshal the participation of ever more organizations in doing this work.
That's great. We're reaching the end of our time here. I just wanted to hit Cindy Hogan's question in the Q&A section as a nice send off here. She asked, right, we've talked about scaling programs and what the future looks like. So she's wondering if the scalable version would lose both the local touch, that trust factor. That is very important. What are your takes on that? We'll start with Shauna.
I think that's a great question. And I think the key component there is, depending on how you scale it, are you scaling it to have the digital navigators working locally and following a same model, or is it like a larger thing where all of the calls or tickets go into one call center located in a state next to you? So I think there's a lot of questions to look at as far as the intents of the program and the intentionality as you scale it.
Great. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
So it's kind of written into our system, I guess, in our procedure of having a local touch, only in the scope that when a digital navigator is working with a community member and helping assist with a health issue. There's also in the process, after they finish or there's a handoff made to an organization or they're able to help assist and solve the issue, we still have another stage, I guess you can call it, where after 2 days, the navigator is set to or assigned the task of following up with that community member, so that the task itself isn't finished or the ticket itself isn't finished and closed as soon as an issue has been quote unquote solved, right? If there's a handoff to an organization, or if the example is connecting your internet to a smart TV, 2 days later after that ticket is solved, the navigator will be tasked to follow up with the community member to make sure the issue is continually solved, or the action, the item that they're trying to accomplish has been accomplished fully. And only after that follow-up can a ticket be fully closed. That way you're able to make sure that an issue isn't just thrown in and quickly solved, and then there's been no follow-up and the issue really wasn't solved, and now there's like this ongoing persisting problem. But instead, by having a follow-up, you're able to make sure that there is that, I guess, soft touch, local touch to a community member, that they're more than just a ticket, right? Like we truly value helping them however we can, and by having that follow-up, we're hoping that that comes across.
Mm-hmm. Krista, what's your take?
Sorry, I was responding in the chat to the question about whether digital navigators increase broadband adoption, and so far our data is demonstrating yes. As an answer to that question, we certainly hope that more data will further demonstrate that. But in terms of the idea of scaling and losing sort of that empathetic touch, I do think this work moves at the speed of trust. And it's hard for me to imagine that ruralist and engaging with this portfolio of work would ever sort of de-emphasize that, even if we are privileged enough to be able to scale it, kind of across our 45 states where we have partner-based organizations. So I think the transactional piece is really in the idea of introducing digital inclusion as part of the portfolio of work of any organization, the idea of all hands and participating in digital equity. That's the transactional part. But in terms of the client-coach relationship, I do think that moving at the speed of trust is the right way to, kind of proceed going forward.
That's really nicely put, Krista, moving at the speed of trust. And, I just want to respond to it from what sort of our understanding typically is of scale. For example, one of the programs in Boston had a huge need for navigators. The regular sort of volunteers were all tapped out doing tutoring. Their digital navigators are from all across the country, just because they posted on an online portal to seek volunteers, and that's who all their digital navigators are. None of them are local. They're all in different parts of the country. So that's an interesting sort of way to think about scale, is that it can be scale on a local level or a national level. But the other thing also is that the way in which we're all thinking about scale is a scale that really translates into increased advocacy, increased buy-in from our systems and funders to understand the need of this program. Like, to me, that's also like the positive aspect of scale, is connecting to local stakeholders, as well as really making the case at the state federal level for the increased need of resources towards this program.
Very well put. With that, we are exactly 1 minute over time. I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for sharing your expertise, your knowledge, and also for staying a little bit longer. The Q&A was on fire today, so really, really happy that we got to get to all of the great questions that folks were able to ask today. I am going to pass the proverbial mic back to Angela, who will close us out, I believe. Angela.
Wow, panelists and Paulo, that was amazing, as we thought it would be. And yes, the Q&A was really intense today, and you all were like on it, right? Typing answers, verbally giving answers. And so NDIA staff is going to make sure that the Q&A is also available along with the recording, because there are so many typed answers that were also really valuable, not just your verbal answers. And we'll also make sure any of this is included with our Digital Navigator model page, so that we don't lose any of the content. So huge thank you to all of you, and thank you to our sponsors for making this all possible. Have a great day.
Take care.